I'm going to start by reading out the kind of like raising our imagination slide here. And that's again from Eric Drexler in Engines of Creation, the book that led to our founding. Whether anyone else is out there or not, we are on our way. Expansion will proceed if we survive, because we're part of a living system and life tends to spread. Pioneers will move outward into worlds without end. Others will remain behind, building settled cultures throughout the aces of space. Where goals change and complexity rules, limits need not bind us. So I'm really, really excited to have such a wonderful panel discussing both energy and space here. We try to cover a lot here in the next few minutes. And I'm super, super excited to have Creon over here, who's leading our space group. Thank you so much for joining. Johan is working on a super interesting AI for weather prediction company, Atmo. We have Danielle here, one of our fellows, also really in the energy space. Malcolm, he's the fusion person, really, like well known for this. We have Kemp, also a repeat guest, a dear friend. Thank you so much for joining us from Astra. And we have Zubrin, who I think many of you probably know about some of his Mars-related work. Do you want to show the book? There we go.
Also nuclear.
Also nuclear, yeah. Well, that is many in the Foresight community, I think. Okay, cool. Well, I can just steal this. So let's start up with perhaps also, I mean, we kind of have to do energy and space both in once. Let's start maybe with energy first. Is there a particular thing within energy that you think could or let's say also climate and weather, that you think will really, really make a big impact on the world in a positive way in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so I used to work in a fusion company a while back, so on my end, and I'll let Malcolm say way more on that. I'm just very excited about the advancements of fusion companies, and especially companies like Commonwealth. We talked about it yesterday with Malcolm, so I think I'll give it to you on that front, but that's the thing I'm the most excited about.
Yep. Malcolm, do you want to chime in? You just need a mic.
If we're talking 5 years, I don't think anything is going to touch the world in that time.
What's your timeline then? A useful
So
one.
in 5 years, the exciting thing for fusion is we should have several companies demonstrating energy gain from fusion. Humans have done this maybe 2 or 3 times at NIF, never any other time, except for the bomb. And so the next big milestone is demonstrating energy gain in a path that is consistent with building a reactor eventually. But that is a pretty abstract positive impact on the world. The real positive impact on the world for energy in the next 5 years is people getting more serious about policy. Things like Build Back Better, all sorts of other technical programs that are going to advance the changes that we need to address climate change.
Well, actually, there is something. In fact, just at this conference that's going on in the Gulf, they've got 60 countries have signed a declaration committing to double the amount of nuclear power in the world by 2050. So this whole thing, basically the anti-growthers have oversold climate change as a menace to the point where they got the environmentalists, real environmentalists, not anti-humans, to say, well, in that case, we should have nuclear power. And I think we're about to have a nuclear renaissance, both through policy and also through, just as there is in fusion, there is now a entrepreneurial revolution going on in fission. There is a whole bunch of startup fission companies that have gotten serious investment, and we're seeing, I'm not one of these people who thinks that the Rickover pressurized water reactor is a bad design. It's a good design, that's why it has lasted so long, but it can be improved on, and we've got people doing thorium, molten salt reactors, we've got people doing the small modular reactors, high temperature reactors, the metal breeder reactors, so this is a happening thing now. And in fact, by the way, China just today announced that they had given an operating license to a lifter, a liquid molten salt thorium breeder reactor has now been licensed, going to start up in China. And that may open people's minds a little bit.
Cool. Danielle, do you want to chime in?
Yes, please. Thank you. I actually began my PhD in nuclear fusion. And it set an idea for a way to do direct conversion from the incredible thermonuclear heat to photons to electricity instead of having to go through a steam plant. And the company that I'm leading now, Light Cell Energy, is basically based on this concept. I call it a portable Dyson sphere. It's a chemical sun, not nuclear, so it's quite a bit easier to handle regulatorily and also practically, that converts high temperature heat released from fuel combustion, but it can be any fuel, including hydrogen. By adding sodium in the form of salt, it produces an extremely bright, almost monochromatic yellow light that if you match it to space solar panels, which is how I ended up on the space group, one of the layers on the space solar panels is almost exactly with a band gap to recover almost all of the energy from the photons that are released. So you can have what we call a solid state internal combustion engine that may have 2 or 3 times the efficiency and be much, much more convenient. I think that batteries have shown that if you have a convenient package, then there are 10 times as many places that people want electricity than if you have to have a loud, vibrating, luggable engine. And so we think that with this chemical reactor, we can open up extremely high power densities to all kinds of parts of the economy. And we think that the size of the economy could 10x just from this one change. So as it did when the steam engine was unlocked, and again, as the internal combustion engine was unlocked. But that doesn't stop there. Actually, since this started from a direct conversion nuclear fusion concept, it is theoretically possible and quite attractive to go after nuclear fusion and fission once we get really good at making low-cost, dependable reactors that can do direct conversion this way. But we're starting with this so that we can get it done without raising too much money and then suffering dilution and then being owned by venture capitalists. Sorry, guys.
Okay, does anyone want to put another one here onto the map in terms of energy? I don't know, Chris, and definitely don't feel obliged.
Well, I mean, I know that we're not supposed to get too political, but I am going to say
Creon.
that I think that you know, you feel free to kick me out or come talk to me later about this and convince me I'm wrong. I think that there's going to be some serious wake-up calls in the near future. I think that the degrowth economies like Germany and stuff like this, who have made a massive investment into unreliable, so-called renewable, intermittent energy, and the massive decarbonization movement, which is being spearheaded by both the Russians, who want to stop any competitors from producing natural gas, which anyone who's interested in reducing carbon emissions, should you be foolish enough to think that is CO2 is a pollutant and that we're all in danger from it, even if you believe that, you would be in favor of natural gas and then nuclear as well. But this Baptist bootlegger alliance between the Russians and the renewable energy industry, which is massively oversubsidized and massively underperformant, there's going to be a wake-up call to the world as these economies start to collapse with self-inflicted wounds over this stuff, and people we're already seeing are going to start to decide that they've had enough of high energy prices, unreliability, and massive stupidity coming from people who claim to have their best interests at heart but have no such thing.
Great. Well, I think before we move over to space, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, to kind of follow up on that, if we look at history, we've seen that people start to go nuclear right after crisis, and there's no pun intended here. So for instance, the independence project that Nixon wanted to deploy of having independence through nuclear power, that was in 1971. So if such a crisis comes in, I think something that we could hope for and do is right now look at and build on plans that would be available when the crisis hits, and then the deciders will have it ready to use. And another thing to think about for fission is fission. Actually, we know how to do it. The biggest cost of a megawatt hour in fission is paying the interest on the capex. So one thing to think about is also. In France, in the West, I would say, and then it becomes very hard to turn off, because once it's built, the price of the megawatt hour is so low that people don't want. So it's very hard to build, very hard to remove. So we have to think about these pricing dynamics, and if we can come up with plans and put it in front of the deciders when shit hits the fan, forgive my French, I think that would be a fun way to think about it.
Cool.
Just on that subject, the capex of a nuclear power plant, as I discuss in my book, The Case for Nukes, which, by the way, is available here after the talk for $20. You buy them, I'll sign them. The capex of a nuclear power plant is a function of the time it takes to construct it. In fact, it may surprise you, but I've got the data here. The cost of building a nuclear power plant per kilowatt goes up as the construction time squared. Squared, not linear. Because cost is people times time, but as the time is extended, the lawsuits, the bureaucracy, or the whole thing associated with it proliferates. The NRC imposes changes, which makes you rip up part of the plant that you already built, and so forth. Our first nuclear power plant in the United States, well, actually, the first one in the Nautilus, they built along with a submarine around it, took 3 years. So then the first commercial nuclear power plant, Shippingport, took 3 years. Now it takes 16. It still takes 4 years in South Korea or China. There's no reason why it should take 16. The fact that it takes 16 makes them cost 25 times more than they should. Okay, now this was a result of an attempt by degrowthers to wreck the nuclear industry, implemented in particular through the Carter administration, which imposed a hostile bureaucracy on the industry. And this bureaucracy has not added to safety at all. It has harmed safety. And it, of course, has greatly harmed progress. One of the reasons why we don't have more advanced reactors than pressurized water reactors right now is because you go to a utility and say, why don't you do a breeder reactor? They say, it's hard enough to get a pressurized water reactor past the NRC. Okay, you think they're going to let me do a breeder reactor? Get out of here. Okay, and even mundane changes, like one of my first engineering jobs, I was working for the Washington State Office of Radiation Protection, and we were regulating the Trojan nuclear power plant, which is in Oregon, but which was very close to the border, so we had authority. They had a problem with corrosion of the steam pipes in the secondary loop, and the utility identified the problem. The problem was they'd gone too cheap. They put carbon steel pipes there instead of stainless, and so they were corroding and had to shut down every 6 months to replace it. So they said, look, we want to replace these with stainless. The NRC would not let them do it. They said, your license specifies carbon steel, okay? They would not let them improve the plant.
All right. Well,
all right, anyway. But but this thing can be blown away in a second. If there's a necessity to do it, you know, Winston Churchill said, Americans will always do the right thing after they've exhausted the alternatives.
Wait.
Well, we've exhausted the alternatives.
Well, I also want to
Co-signed.
hear from, after a brief comment from you, Danielle.
I just want to say everything he just said is accurate. He wrote a book on it. I wrote a long tweet, but graphs are in there. Basically, South Korea has defied the rest of the organization by continuing to learn and build, and it's really cheap there, so how about we learn to do it in the rest of the world?
Cool. Maybe one final point on fusion. What do you think is it holding back, and like how can we affect some change there, Malcolm?
Can I say something about fission?
You may also say something about fission. Yes.
I think everything you said is true, but it ignores the question of how we get from here to the world that you and I want. Like, the NRC is what the NRC is. Congress has been trying to change it for 10 or 15 years, and it keeps on providing new regulations that are a copy-paste of the old regulations. I don't know how we get there. It's a very nice dream, and it seems to be condemned to stay just a dream.
There's one thing I will say. I've been rebranding solar as solar nuclear as just a nice little twist. Remind everybody. So that might help.
Okay, great. Well, so anything, final points on space. Anything you want to say on fusion here? Yeah. Sorry, on energy before we hop to...
You just said that getting rid of the NRC is an impossible dream. It's not an impossible dream. I'm a time traveler, but in the time period that I came from, there was no NRC, okay? And I can envision a world without one. And once again, if it's needed to get done, it can be gotten done.
Great. I love that we're like, I don't even have to ask you guys to be spicy. You do it all automatically.
Good
Could you
energy on
pass
this
the mic on to Malcolm now? Thank you.
You want me to say something on fusion
Do
now,
it.
right? Okay. Sorry? Okay. I think we're about to get to space. So I got involved with fusion because I looked at this landscape and I concluded we need firm energy in abundant quantities that could only come from advanced geothermal, fission, or fusion, and I just cannot see a way to help fission dig itself out of the hole that it's in. So my optimism about fusion is basically that it is regulated differently from fission, and it's not yet hated by the world. And it's technically really, really hard, but technical problems actually seem a little bit easier to solve than deeply entrenched political problems.
Great.
And that might
Wow.
just be that I'm an engineer, not a politician, but the politicians haven't been doing a great job at solving this one. So I hope that fusion will demonstrate gain in the next 3 to 5 years. We'll have early fusion power plants on the grid in the 2030s, hopefully the first half of the 2030s. And then we have a monumental problem scaling these things. Tritium is in scarce supply. There are a lot of engineering problems. So the best thing you can do to help fusion at the moment is start a picks and shovels fusion company, something like Marathon Energy or Kyoto Fusioneering, and get to work on these adjacent engineering problems that are ignored at the moment.
Cool. With that, we're going to close the energy bucket and we finally give the mic to Chris. What are you excited about in space technologies coming up in the next 5 years?
All right, in the next 10 years, I'm, like everyone else, excited to see Starship fly. I think that's going to be huge when we start to see the cost per kilogram come down. I think there's also been a tremendous amount of investment in companies like Planet and others over the last few years. And we're seeing, for the first time, real applications in space that, that are actually commercially scalable. Starlink is an example, but there's now Telesat in the Canadian government. The SDA is putting up a big national security constellation here in the US. OneWeb Gen 2, there's several Chinese constellations. We're going to see many thousands of satellites operated by many different operators. I actually think that this is very akin to the internet in the early days, when you saw closed proprietary networks like AOL and CompuServe, where they bought the infrastructure required from local telcos to host like dial-up banks of modems and things. And this was before the internet and standards like TCP/IP, BGP enabled there to be a network of networks. And I think what we're going to see happen in the next decade is in space, the internet move into space, into low Earth orbit. And we're going to see interconstellations, where connectivity between satellites in low Earth orbit will provide basically every telco on Earth to own and operate satellites that will be able to communicate with each other using temporal spatial routing protocols. Basically, you flip the internet on its head, where instead of having every router be fixed and you have the protocols be kind of optimized around a fixed network topology, we're going to see a topology where satellites are traveling many thousands of miles an hour past each other, and they're going to be re-optimizing a kind of a very complex network in space, and then forming networks to ground networks. And I think that's going to be very exciting to see, because it's going to open up a tremendous amount of competition when there's not just 1 or 2 players like Kuiper and Starlink, but there's hundreds, if not thousands, of opportunities for there to be satellites that participate in this network.
Wonderful. Love that future. Creon, let's hear from you.
What was the question again? What am I excited about?
What are you excited about in space in the next 5 years?
Oh, in the next 5 years, well, I'd like to slightly pivot that and say, what am I excited about, particularly that communities like Foresight and other space enthusiasts and space R&D people can come up with. And it's not so much it's not particularly technology, because I think the technology is kind of going on a accelerating but linear ComSats, Earth observation sats, and the usual science and military stuff. The same stuff we've been using space for since the dawn of the space age, or a little before I was born, but not much. And anyway, and then what we have is we have people like, so many people in the space community, including at Foresight, unfortunately, who are like, space is the answer. Now, what's the question? Or choose your field. brain emulation, the genomics, like it's always the same. My technology is the answer. Now, what's your question? But anyway, with space, people are kind of the founders of that nonsense. So it bothers me. And so what I hear is, well, we're gonna mine the asteroids, and it's gonna change everything. We're gonna like settle up Mars, and it's gonna change everything, and we're gonna build space solar power systems. Now, I'm not saying whether I'm for or against these things. They're bold visions, but the problem is these things are so expensive and so far in the future. It's not to say we shouldn't aim towards them and think about them and advocate them if we can figure it out, but we need some intermediate cases that close economically and feasibly without costing trillions upon trillions of dollars. We cannot go from ComSats and Earth observation sats and the ISS and a few probes to the planets, which we've been doing for decades and decades, to self-sustaining colonies on the Moon and Mars, and mining the asteroids and building solar things in space. We need intermediate stages. Someone has to come up with some cases that are in between these things we're already doing and these things we dream about, and they have to close.
Do you guys have a few examples of what could be these intermediate stages?
I've spoken long enough.
So since I have the audience, the three-way trade between US dollars, euros, and Japanese yen, say, can be handled at a lower latency relativistically, like a space-like relative to any on-ground topology through fiber. And you can make an ungodly amount of money with that arbitrage. So that's a nice... No, you can't? All right.
Well, pennies in front of steamrollers, as they say, and we've already gone far enough dynamiting mountains to run fibers so that we can shave a few milliseconds off of the high-speed trades. It's killing us, and it's stupid, and it's non-productive at its core.
Okay,
well,
Johan,
let me
over there.
just...
I said ungodly. All right.
So there are two things I'm excited about space. The first one, start with an anecdote. 20 years ago, I visited a lot of manufacturers in Russia, around Moscow, so where they build the MiGs, Moscow State, where they designed the Soyuz. And you could see that they were like really scrappy, right? They were like basically trying stuff out, see if it works, see if it sticks. And then I visited the French one back in 2011 for launch, and they were like super top down. Like everything is process and everything is excruciating, and it's not sexy anymore, right? Because you don't work on space, you work on answering regulations. And 2 weeks ago, I visited the Starship factory, and it's back to kind of the Russian style. I'm very excited about these new approaches for manufacturing. That's the first thing. The second thing is there is going to be a diminution of cost of doing remote sensing, which we are betting on in our company because we work only on the models. We assume that the cost of sensing is going to go very, very low, especially with Starship. And that will allow us to basically get a much better modeling of the atmosphere on Earth and to anticipate, to better predict. And if we can better predict, we can also go towards some things like, one thing I'm very excited about is we came up with this concept of minimum effective dose for geoengineering. I don't really like the big G word, but what are the smallest modifications that you can do if indeed, I mean, we know that the atmosphere is a chaotic system. Let's say you want to steer the track of a typhoon, it's gonna hit Manila. If you can steer it 2 degrees on its trajectory, you can save plenty of thousands of lives. So then go in the chaotic region, send a boat there, and so that's kind of the vision for us, is like better sensing. We're working on the models now. The models are 40,000 times faster than classical NWP, 30% more accuracy. So you can really start thinking about protecting humans of another case of when shit might hit the fan.
Cool.
Okay, I've got something to say.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so, no, it's important. Look, my fundamental thesis is freedom will give us space, space will give us freedom. And we're seeing the most striking demonstrations of this being unveiled to us right now. We mentioned Starship. Where did Starship come from? Starship came from freedom. Okay, that's where it came from. Okay, and it's going to open up space. Okay, as I said, and even more profoundly than anybody today is thinking about, because with reusable rockets, you don't just get cheap space launch, you get used rockets, something that hasn't been a thing up till now. Like used cars are much cheaper than new cars. Okay, there's going to be used launch vehicles. Space is going to be opened. Okay, so freedom will give us space. How space give us freedom? Well, whenever any more challenging domain is opened, it always benefits the free societies the most. Okay, if you talk about military science, the dominant sea powers of the world, when that was the most challenging domain for military activity, were the liberal societies, the Athenians, the Dutch, the British. Okay, when air power was opened, even though it was pioneered first by the Japanese and the Germans, they were rapidly excelled by the Anglo-Americans, far excelled by them in their exploitation of it. Soviets had the first space launch, but we not only beat them to the moon, we're doing Starship. Okay, and this is going to benefit us immensely. And in fact, you're seeing this right now in Ukraine. Why is Ukraine able to hold off Russia right now? It's because of space power, space-based reconnaissance, communications, GPS-guided munitions. They're fighting even with Russians who outnumber them 4-1. Okay, and the future is going to belong to the free. And that is the most optimistic thing that is here. The opening of space opens the future to the free.
Thank you. Point taken. I do want to hear, in terms of intermediate steps, what are you guys doing at Astra to create what are the long-term plans, let's say, with Astra, perhaps even beyond, of creating some of the intermediate steps?
I think the other word I would use is scale, right? I think that until you have scale in space, it really wasn't that, there's this great quote, scale is what makes innovation matter, right? If you do something really cool and it's in a little lab somewhere, it doesn't change anything for anyone. But if you're able to actually replicate that and scale it, so what makes these constellations like Planet work is there are enough satellites where you can actually image the Earth every day. What makes Starlink work is you have enough capacity to actually serve a meaningful number of people. And I think, Astra is trying to scale rockets so we can make rockets like aluminum cans, right? I think there's this fallacy that you have to have the world's largest rocket and make it infinitely reusable to make the economics work. The fundamental issue is economics, right? So if Textron can make 500 Cessnas per year on average over the past 75 years for a few $100,000 a Cessna, a rocket weighs as much as a Cessna. It's a big aluminum tube with a pointy end, and the engine doesn't have many more moving parts if more than an internal combustion engine. So if you can make a rocket for a few $100,000 that can throw 1,000 kilograms into low Earth orbit, that's a few $100s a kilogram as well. There's lots of ways to get there if you focus on scale and economics. And so I think what we're starting to see that's making space really relevant to the world is we're starting to see that scale allow it to be something that not just governments, but venture capitalists and other, you've seen BlackRock make significant investments in 6 commercial space companies. And it's because the scale with which they're operating. And so that's mine.
Love it. I love that make your final point.
So just on the point of scale, our relevance to space is, as I mentioned, the space solar cells, which are typically very expensive, and divided into different layers, which can absorb the different colors from the sunlight. So the sun produces about 1 kilowatt per square meter at Earth or in 1 point. Yes, thank you. Important to note. What we're trying to do is twofold. One, have a large terrestrial market so we can get to that scale, and the other is reduce the cost of the solar cells by having a much higher concentration. So we're at 16 suns, about 16 kilowatts per square meter right now. We want to hit 25 suns by the end of the year. And that gives all of the space solar, the really lightweight, high-efficiency space solar, a way to get onto a learning curve that really has mass market capability. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, but we are at time, but I want to close it out by all of you guys saying the number one thing that people are supposed to talk to you about afterwards. It can be a challenge that they should solve. It can be a problem that you're really interested in right now. It can be just something that you're trying to solve with your organization, anything.
Alison, you told us to review these questions. Yeah. And so what I would say is I'm interested in talking about almost any of those questions that were in the list with anybody who wants to dialogue. I particularly want people to disagree with me so that I can learn.
Wonderful. We'll give you the question list again. It's long.
All right. I think if you are a physics geek and you are interested in talking about solving partial differential equations with deep learning, come see me. We're going to have a good time.
I'm interested in talking about energy, any interesting ways to use extremely power dense, energy, where especially if you're interested in doing prototype development and have money, please talk to me. I'll talk with other stuff as well. But
I'm game for anything to do with energy and space. I have a lot of opinions about space as well, but also energy and space.
Share one about space.
It feels a little bit mean now. Come talk to me privately, or in a small group or something like that. I'm not quite ready to phrase it for this scale of consumption. But space and energy have a ton of Elon Musk-sized problems. And for all of his faults, there's only one Elon Musk. So the question is, how are we going to solve the rest of them? Who else is going to take on Elon Musk-sized problems? And how can we help them?
Wonderful. Some hot takes then for the off-the-record discussion. Chris?
Yeah, I think about 2 years ago, there was really an almost infinite flow of capital into these companies. And that's no longer the case. So I think there's a lot of folks that have given up. The charlatans have left the building. And the companies that survive the next couple of years are going to be the companies that contribute to this ecosystem that complement what Elon's doing. I think that now is the time for the entrepreneurs, the people that really are passionate about this space, to join the companies that are mission-driven, that are determined to make it. Because there are many that will not. And I think now is the time. I announced a bid to take Astra private. We've got to persevere through this period of time where capital is not as available as it was a couple of years ago. And if we can do that, I think we can create some great, very successful businesses to complement Elon.
Okay. People sometimes ask me, what's going to be the export of a Mars city-state? And my answer has always been inventions, because the Mars colonists are going to be a group of technologically adept people in a frontier environment where they're going to be forced to innovate in many areas, including biotech, energy, artificial intelligence, all these sorts of things. And these things will solve their problems but be licensable on Earth. So people say, then why not start such an inventors colony on Earth now? And I resisted that for a while, but now I said, okay, we're going to do it. And so we're going to do exactly that. So the Mars Society is now starting this Mars Technology Institute, which is going to work on inventing the technologies needed to settle Mars and spin them off for commercialization and to benefit the Earth. And if you want to know more about that, come up and talk to me. And if you don't want to know more about that, you can still come up and buy a book. Thanks.
Wonderful. I'm glad we got that out of the way. Any other books to share over here? No, maybe a few in writing. Okay, well, thank you. That was really wild. Damn, we covered a lot of ground here, and we can only scratch the surface of these areas. But that's what the panel discussions, that's what the speaker meet and greet in a second is for. Before that, if we could get up the screen for one more second, I would love to just pinpoint a little bit of like what the audience and what people here at Vision Week can think about of the few spicy questions that we have going on. Again, all of these questions are in our panel chat on WhatsApp. First one is, a nuclear fusion reactor consistently achieves break-even energy output over a 30-day period by ... And usually, well, I guess 77% think it's 2050, 74, 2045. Do you have a hot take on this, Malcolm? Well, it's basically you can choose more than one, because whenever, like basically any year that comes later will also basically like, result as that year. Malcolm, do you have any hot take on this? What do you?
I think it's completely wrong.
Okay, what do you think?
By 2030.
2030. Whoa. Okay.
I don't see anything about being hooked up to the grid, etc., etc.
Wonderful. Okay, 2030. That is a really ambitious timeline. I love it. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Next one up. When will a large-scale geoengineering intervention cause an international dispute? Again, we have a few people thinking it's as early as 2035. This is a really, really big chunk of people thinking that it will be pretty early, honestly. And then the other one is like even the earliest one that you could bet. Oh, and a few more people making their voice
Wait,
heard.
it depends on what you mean by large-scale geoengineering. I mean, arguably, we've been geoengineering for decades, and at least inadvertently. Another thing is that Russ George, brought out, how many? 100, a lot of tons.
About 100 tons.
About 100 tons of iron sulfate, put it in the Canadian Native American offshore waters with their permission, brought the salmon back, and was promptly raided by a SWAT team and shut down.
Did it cause a national geopolitical international dispute yet?
No, it
Well,
just
he's
caused a
Canadian, and I
freak
know
out.
about it. So.
Okay, good. Next one up. Which areas should we prioritize for progress in space development and exploration? Sorry for the typo, guys. Launch services, spacecrafts, manned and unmanned, in-space service, propulsion and technology. Those are the few of the topics that people are very excited about. Still, get your voice heard and start voting and betting on these. This one was a fun one. The first space tourism program sends over 40 tourists per year past the common line by... Well, we have a few people being pretty optimistic here with 25, but I think most of you guys have, unfortunately, much longer timelines on that type of stuff. All right, this one is one for you, Creon. Will space debris pose a serious risk to our human future in space? 60% say yes.
It's a problem. It's a problem that I've spent a lot of time studying and speaking about. It's now more of a problem with the mega constellations. I think there are a number of ways to deal with it, but that's a whole, afternoon of its own. So what is the idea? Will it pose a serious risk?
Yeah. Well, talk to Creon if you want to talk more about space debris.
Yeah.
He's given some fantastic talks on that.
Complicated topic.
And finally, last but not least, and Robin Hansen, when we did this at Vision Weekend France, was very angry about this question because he wrote Grabby Aliens that has a precise prediction on this. Will we detect extraterrestrial intelligent life in the universe in 100 years from now? Basically. 31% say yes. All right. Well, with that, we close the panels. If I can ask anyone from the Neurotech panel to raise their hand now. Neurotech, we're going to have accumulating over here. So anyone who wants to chat Neurotech, your speakers will be here. And anyone who wants to chat energy in space, our speakers for energy in space will be over here. So you can now find your favorite speakers for the next 20 minutes or so. Thank you so much for a wonderful, very spicy panel.